After Keanu Reeves' eulogy, Sandra Bullock revealed the truth. Nobody knew. The church was silent except for the faint sound of rain falling outside. Soft candlelight flickered against the marble walls, and every face inside carried the same quiet sadness. It was the day the world said goodbye to a man who had touched millions, not only through the screen, but through the small, unseen acts that defined him. Keanu Reeves had been more than a legend, more than a star. To the few who truly knew him, he was the rare kind of soul who healed others while silently carrying his own pain. As the priest spoke, Sandra Bullock sat near the front row, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes were fixed on the wooden coffin where a single white rose rested on top. She hadn't said a word since the news broke. Not to the press, not to the cameras, not even to her closest friends. But inside her heart, there was a storm of memories she could no longer hold back. The world believed they knew everything about Keanu. Yet there was a truth only she carried. One that began decades earlier, in the quiet space between two lost hearts. When it was her turn to speak, Sandra stood slowly. Every camera in the hall turned toward her. Yet in that moment, she saw none of them. She saw only him. The man who had once sat on her kitchen floor at midnight, fixing a broken chair because he refused to let her do it alone. The man who had left letters instead of gifts, who had chosen silence over attention and kindness over pride. Her voice shook as she began, but each word carried the weight of years unspoken. "When I first met Keanu," she said softly, "I thought he was just quiet. Later, I realized he was listening. To everyone, to everything, even the things no one else could hear." The crowd leaned in. It wasn't a rehearsed eulogy. It wasn't filled with perfect sentences. It was raw and real, like Keanu himself. She spoke of a day long ago, when both of them were filming under heavy rain. She had been exhausted, hiding tears behind laughter. Keanu had noticed. Without a word, he had taken off his jacket, wrapped it around her shoulders, and whispered, "You don't have to be strong every second, Sandy." Those simple words, she said, had changed her more than any movie, any award, any applause. But there was something else, something she had never shared. As the rain outside grew louder, her voice grew softer. "There's a letter he gave me once," she continued, "and I never told anyone what it said." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the cameras seemed to freeze. Sandra reached into her pocket and unfolded a small, time-worn piece of paper. The ink had faded, but the message was still clear. She didn't read it aloud, not yet. Her hand trembled as she looked at it, then back at the coffin. "He wrote this years ago," she said, "and I think the world deserves to know the man behind the silence." Then she paused. Her eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. "But before I read it," she said, "you should know what led to this letter. Because Keanu never wrote it out of love. He wrote it out of loss," the crowd murmured softly. Sandra took a slow breath and looked toward the audience. Her mind drifted back to a time few remembered, a time before fame had swallowed them both, when they were simply two people trying to find light in a world that didn't stop hurting. Years earlier, during the filming of their second movie together, Keanu had vanished for a few days. No one knew where he went. The studio said it was exhaustion, but Sandra had sensed something deeper. One night, while searching for him, she found him sitting alone near an old theater, his eyes distant. Beside him lay a small photo of a young girl with the same gentle smile he carried. When she asked who it was, he simply said, "Someone I couldn't save." That was the moment she understood that Keanu's kindness came from a wound. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was protection. He had lost more than anyone could imagine, and yet he never let the world see that side of him. He carried it like a quiet promise, using his pain to heal others instead of drowning in it. And now, at his farewell, Sandra knew she had to honor that promise. The memory burned in her mind. The night they sat under the city lights. Two broken souls sharing stories no one else would ever hear. Keanu had told her something that haunted her still. When you lose everything, the only way to stay alive is to keep giving. As she stood at the podium, she whispered, "And he kept giving." Even when he had nothing left, the hall was still. A few people wiped their eyes. Others simply bowed their heads. But Sandra wasn't finished. She knew what she had to reveal next would change how the world remembered him forever. She took another deep breath, looked at the letter again, and said, "The truth is, this letter isn't for me. It's for someone else. And it's the reason he disappeared that week." The audience gasped. The cameras refocused. For a moment, even the rain outside seemed to stop. She folded the paper and looked up, her eyes glistening. "There's more you don't know," she said, her voice trembling, "and it's time you did." As she stepped back from the microphone, she could feel the air in the room tighten. Whispers spread through the hall, and the press leaned forward eagerly. But Sandra didn't wait for questions. She walked straight toward the exit, the letter still in her hand, her heels echoing softly against the floor. Behind her, the murmur of the crowd grew louder, but inside her chest, all she could hear was Keanu's voice, soft, kind, and unshaken. "You don't have to be strong every second." And with that, she disappeared into the rain outside, leaving the world wondering what truth she had just refused to share. The next morning, headlines filled the world. Sandra Bullock hints at unknown chapter of Keanu Reeves' life. But no one knew what the letter said. Not yet. Only Sandra did. And as she sat alone in her kitchen, the same one where Keanu once laughed while fixing that old chair, she unfolded the letter once more. It began with 6 words that made her hands tremble. "If you're reading this, I'm gone." Her breath caught. The next lines blurred as tears filled her eyes. The truth was more than she expected, more than anyone could bear. And before she could read the rest, her phone rang. She hesitated, then answered. A voice on the other end whispered, "Miss Bullock, there's something we found among Keanu's things. You need to see it. It's about you." She froze, staring at the letter in her hand, her pulse quickening. "About me?" she asked quietly. The voice replied, "Yes, it's not just a letter, it's a video." And the call ended. Outside, the rain began again, soft and endless, as the screen faded to black. The hidden message, the next morning, felt heavier than any she had lived before. The world outside Sandra's window was wrapped in gray, the kind of quiet sky that made everything feel distant. Raindrops clung to the glass as if they, too, refused to fall. Her coffee sat untouched, the letter still open beside it. She had read the first line again and again, but her mind kept circling back to the voice from the call. A video about her, found among his things. Sandra's hands trembled as she picked up her phone and replayed the last words she had heard. The tone in the man's voice hadn't been professional. It was personal, almost hesitant, as if he didn't know how much his message would change everything. She didn't wait long. Within an hour, she was driving through Los Angeles rain, heading toward the private storage facility where Keanu's team had gathered his belongings. The roads were wet and empty, the windshield wipers moving rhythmically like a heartbeat she could no longer control. She thought about all the times she had spoken to Keanu about loss, about love, about silence. Never once had he hinted that something like this existed. When she arrived, the man from the call, a quiet archivist named Mark, met her at the entrance. His eyes carried the same grief she saw in her own reflection. He led her through a dim corridor lined with labeled boxes, scripts, and personal artifacts. On one of the tables sat a small black envelope and a hard drive. Taped to the front was a note written in Keanu's familiar handwriting. For Sandy. "Only when the lights go quiet." Her throat tightened. She could hear his voice in those words, the same gentle tone that used to calm her when everything around them was chaos. Mark nodded silently and left the room, closing the door behind her. The rain outside softened to a whisper. Sandra plugged the drive into the laptop. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered, and Keanu's face appeared, lit only by the faint glow of a lamp. He looked older, tired, but his eyes carried that same unshakable peace she remembered. He smiled softly before speaking. "Hey, Sandy," he said. "If you're seeing this, I guess my silence finally found its end." Sandra covered her mouth. Her heart pounded as his voice filled the room. "I've never been good at saying things out loud," he continued. "So I'm saying them now, before time takes away the chance. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Something I couldn't say when we were together in those long nights between takes, or when we sat watching the sunrise after that last shoot. I didn't stay silent because I didn't care. I stayed silent because I cared too much. Her eyes burned with tears. Keanu's voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of something unfinished. "Do you remember that week I disappeared?" he asked. "Everyone said I was sick, but I wasn't. I went to see someone." "Her name was Ella," Sandra frowned. She had never heard that name before. "She was the daughter of someone I once loved, a woman I lost years before I ever met you," Keanu said softly. Ella reached out to me. She was sick. She wanted to know who her mother really was, and I couldn't tell her without breaking a promise I made. So I stayed with her just talking for days. I thought I could save her, but I was too late. His voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion in the recording. She died that week, and I buried her beside her mother. I didn't tell anyone. Not the press, not my family, not even you. But after the funeral, I found something she'd written. It said, "Don't be afraid to tell the truth, even if it hurts someone kind. And that's why I'm recording this." Sandra's tears fell freely now. She remembered that week how he had come back pale, distant, but still smiling. She had thought it was exhaustion. She had never asked more. Keanu looked into the camera again. "Sandy, the truth is, I met her mother before I ever came to Hollywood. She was a theater actress full of light. I never told anyone because she didn't want fame, and when she died in that accident, I promised to protect her memory. Ella was her only child. She grew up believing I was a friend of her mother's. But she found out the truth just before she passed away." He paused, took a deep breath, and whispered, "She was my daughter." Sandra's breath stopped. The words hit her like thunder. The room around her felt smaller, colder. She replayed the moment in her head, but his voice echoed again, steady and clear. "I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want people to think my silence was guilt. It was love. I wanted her to live quietly, free from the shadow of my name. But when she died, I realized I had no one left who truly knew me." "No one, except you?" His eyes softened. "You once told me that silence can be cruel. Maybe you were right. Maybe my silence hurt you. But it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I wanted to protect the one thing that was pure between us, our friendship." He leaned closer to the camera. "But there's more you need to know. Ella didn't just write me that note. She wrote you one too. I left it in the wooden box from our first movie set. The one with the sand timer you gave me. Find it, read it, and when you do, you'll understand everything I couldn't say." The screen flickered. He smiled faintly. "You always said stories should end with hope. So here's mine. No matter where you are, keep being light. Because even in my darkest moments, you were that for me." Then the video ended. The screen went black, leaving only the faint reflection of her tear-streaked face. For a long moment, Sandra didn't move. She just sat there, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Keanu's secret, his daughter, his silence. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle she had been living beside, but never seeing. After several minutes, she reached for her phone and called Mark back into the room. "The wooden box," she whispered. "Where is it?" He blinked in confusion. "The one from the film set? It's here. We found it sealed in his private locker." He handed her a small wooden box carved with delicate patterns. Inside, there was the sand timer she had gifted him years ago, and beneath it, a folded envelope addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. The front read, "To the woman who made him smile again." Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was a single page written in soft, curved letters. "Dear Miss Bullock, he talked about you often. Not like the world does. Not as a star, but as a person who saw him when no one else did. He said you reminded him of my mother. Kind, strong, gentle. He said you taught him how to forgive himself. If you're reading this, then he's finally at peace. Thank you for giving him light when he thought he didn't deserve it." The letter ended with one final line that made her lips tremble. "Tell him it's okay to rest now." Sandra folded the letter slowly, pressing it against her chest. Her tears came silently, not from sadness alone, but from a deep ache that mixed love, loss, and gratitude. As she looked around the room filled with his memories, she realized how many stories Keanu had left untold, not because he wanted to hide, but because he wanted others to shine instead. She whispered softly, "You can rest now, Keanu." But as the words left her lips, She noticed something else in the box, a small, black notebook tucked under the sand timer. Its cover was plain, but inside were pages of handwritten notes. The first line read, "Project Sunrise, to be revealed only to Sandra." Her heart skipped. She turned the next page and saw a list of names, places, and unfinished thoughts. Whatever this project was, it wasn't about film. It was about something far deeper. And at the bottom of the page, one final note in Keanu's handwriting. "If anything happens to me, she'll know where to look. Under the lights we built." Sandra stared at the words, confusion mixing with fear. "Under the lights we built." She whispered the phrase again and again, trying to make sense of it. Then suddenly she froze. She knew exactly what it meant. The lights they built, the stage lights from the old studio where they had first met, years ago. Her tears dried instantly. She stood, grabbed her coat, and said to Mark, "I need access to the old Warner studio tonight." He hesitated. "At this hour?" "It's closed. Then break it open," she said quietly. Because whatever he left there, it's the next part of his story. And as she walked into the dark, the rain started again, this time harder, colder, like the world itself was urging her forward. Under the lights they built, the night air was cold and sharp as Sandra drove toward the old Warner studio. Her headlights cut through the fog, illuminating empty streets that once carried the noise of film crews and laughter. It was past midnight, but her heart wouldn't let her sleep. Keanu's words echoed in her mind, "Under the lights we built." She had no doubt what that meant. The set from their first movie together still stood there, untouched, like a frozen memory. When she reached the gates, the security guard recognized her instantly. His eyes widened, unsure whether to stop her or salute her. But before he could speak, she said quietly, "I just need an hour. Please." Her voice carried both exhaustion and determination. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded and opened the gate. The studio lot was silent. Old posters peeled off the walls, the smell of dust and history heavy in the air. Her heels clicked softly against the concrete as she walked toward Soundstage 19, the place where she and Keanu had filmed their first big emotional scene together. It had been the scene that changed both of their lives, not just as actors, but as people. She reached the heavy door and pushed it open. The faint smell of wood, paint, and old memories filled the air. The space was vast and empty, but the large overhead lights still hung above the stage like ghosts of another time. Some were broken, others covered in cobwebs, but the shape of the room was exactly as she remembered. Her flashlight beam cut across the floor, revealing the faint outline of old tape marks where cameras once stood. And then she saw it. An old wooden chair in the center covered with a dusty cloth. On it sat a small metal box marked with Keanu's handwriting, "For the final act." Her breath caught. She stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside was a single film reel labeled Project Sunrise. There was also a folded note, written in the same familiar, steady hand. "If you're here, Sandy, it means you still care enough to look. Play the reel. You'll find the rest of the truth in the light." Her eyes filled with tears. She carried the reel carefully to the projection booth in the corner. The equipment was old, but she remembered how to use it. After a few tries, the projector whirred to life and the wall in front of her filled with flickering light. The first image appeared, grainy, black and white. It showed Keanu, younger, sitting on that same stage. His hair was longer, his clothes simple. There was no film crew, no script. This wasn't a scene. This was personal. "If you're watching this," he said softly, "then I guess I never got to finish what I started." His eyes looked tired but peaceful. Behind him, she could see the same wooden chair, the same background they once shared during late-night rehearsals. "I called this project Sunrise," he continued, "because I wanted it to be about beginnings. Not fame, not pain, just hope. I recorded stories of people who reminded me what kindness really looks like, and one of them was you." The footage cut to short clips. Behind-the-scenes moments she didn't even remember were filmed. Keanu laughing as she stumbled over her lines. Him helping a young crew member fix a broken cable. Him sitting quietly beside an extra who looked nervous before her first scene. His voice continued over the clips. People think we're remembered for what we do on screen, but I think it's the moments no one sees that matter most. The small ones. The quiet ones. Then the film shifted again. Footage of a hospital room. Sandra gasped. It was the girl, Ella. She was frail, pale, smiling weakly at the camera. Keanu's hand appeared in the frame holding hers. "Hi, Miss Bullock," Ella said softly. "He told me about you. He said you made him believe in happy endings again." Sandra covered her mouth, her body trembling. The girl's voice was fragile, but filled with calm courage. "He told me not all stories end in love," Ella said, "but the good ones always end in peace." The footage flickered again, returning to Keanu. He looked directly into the camera now. "I kept this part private because it wasn't meant for the world," he said. "It was meant for you, Sandy. I wanted you to know that even when things ended quietly between us, you were the only person who ever made me feel seen. You reminded me that I could still be human." Sandra sank slowly to her knees. The tears came silently now, falling into her lap. "If you ever find this," Keanu continued, "please finish what I started, share Project Sunrise. Not as a movie, but as a story of real people. People who healed others through kindness, just like Ella tried to do. I wanted the proceeds to go to her foundation. It's all in the folder labeled Sunrise Fund." "I couldn't finish it. But you can." The screen went dark for a few seconds. Then one final clip played. It was Keanu, sitting on the floor of the same stage, looking up at the empty lights above him. "I guess this is goodbye," he said softly. "But remember, endings aren't darkness. They're just the space before light returns. And you, Sandy, you were always the light." The projector flickered, then stopped. The room fell silent. Sandra sat motionless, the echo of his last words still hanging in the air. She could almost feel him there beside her, the warmth of his presence, the quiet strength that had always made her feel safe. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she wiped her tears, stood up, and looked toward the ceiling where the lights hung like sleeping stars. "You're not gone," she whispered. "You just changed places." As she turned off the projector, her flashlight beam landed on a piece of paper taped near the booth. It was another note in Keanu's handwriting. "The sunrise begins where the real ends." She frowned, scanning the walls until her light caught a narrow door at the far end of the studio. She hadn't noticed it before. It was half hidden behind an old curtain. She pushed it open and found a small room filled with photographs, letters, and notebooks, all neatly stacked. On the wall was a large photo of Ella smiling beside Keanu, with a plaque that read, "For those who light the dark." In the corner of the room stood a small safe. Taped to it was a key and another note. "Inside is the truth about who saved me before I ever learned to save others." Her hands shook as she took the key. The lock clicked open. Inside were a few documents, a watch, and an old cassette tape labeled 1996, the day everything changed. She held the tape in her hand, her heart pounding. She didn't need to guess what year that was. It was the year they first met. For a moment, she closed her eyes and whispered, "What did you hide from me, Keanu?" And as she stood there, the light above her flickered once, then twice, then glowed brighter, as if responding to her words somewhere deep inside. She felt he was guiding her toward something larger, something unfinished. She put the tape in her bag, turned off the flashlight, and whispered into the dark, "I'll finish your sunrise." As she walked out of the studio, the first hint of dawn began to break through the clouds. Soft rays of gold touched the wet ground, reflecting off puddles like scattered pieces of light. And for the first time in days, she smiled. The day everything changed. The morning sun spread faint gold through the clouds as Sandra sat in her car, gripping the old cassette in her hands. The label, 1996, the day everything changed, looked worn, the ink smudged by time. She had already called her assistant to find an old tape player, and within an hour, one sat quietly on the passenger seat beside her. She took a deep breath, slid the cassette in, and pressed play, a faint click. Static. Then Keanu's voice filled the car, soft, younger, unsteady. I guess this is my record," he began. "I don't know if anyone will ever hear it, but if I ever forget who I am, Maybe this will remind me. Sandra's heart tightened. It wasn't the voice of the calm, collected man she had known for years. This was a younger Keanu, uncertain, hurting, searching. It's been 3 weeks since the accident, he continued. The doctors say I'm lucky. I don't feel lucky. She's gone. And I can't stop seeing her face every time I close my eyes. His breath shook between words. Her name was Emily. She was supposed to be with me on the film shoot, but she stayed behind because I forgot my lines that morning. She said, "Go do your scene, I'll meet you after." She never did. The tape hissed softly, then his voice returned, lower. A drunk driver hit her car. The police said it was instant, but nothing about it feels instant to me. Every moment since then feels longer, heavier. Sandra closed her eyes. This was the woman he had spoken about in the video, the mother of Ella. I met her years ago at a small theater downtown, Keanu said. She wasn't famous, but she had something I never had. Peace. She taught me how to see life without noise. I thought I'd spend my life trying to be the man she saw in me, and now she's gone, and I can't even look in a mirror. There was silence for nearly half a minute. Then the sound of rain against a window, faintly captured in the background. "Today," he said finally, "I met someone on set. Her name's Sandra." We barely talked. But for the first time in weeks, I laughed. Just once. She didn't even notice. But I did. "Maybe that's something." Sandra froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "She reminds me of Emily in some strange way," Keanu continued. "Not because she looks like her, but because she carries that same quiet strength. Maybe that's why I feel guilty for smiling. It's too soon to feel anything but grief. But maybe that smile meant I'm still alive." The tape clicked softly as if the recorder had shifted in his hands. "I don't know what to do with this pain," he whispered. "So I'll keep working. I'll keep giving. Maybe kindness is just grief disguised as purpose. Maybe that's how you survive." His voice cracked for the first time. Emily used to say, "One day, someone will remind you that you're still human." Maybe she was right. Maybe that's what Sandra is here for. The tape ended with the faint sound of him breathing, the quiet hum of the room around him, and then silence. Sandra sat motionless. Tears streamed down her face, not from guilt or sadness alone, but from the realization that their first meeting, the one she had always thought was coincidence, had been the turning point in his healing. She had never known it. He had never told her. For a long moment, she stared out the windshield. The city looked the same, but everything inside her felt different. She finally understood why Keanu had built walls around his pain, why he had given so much to others yet spoken so little about himself. He had rebuilt his soul piece by piece, using kindness as his foundation. And without knowing it, she had been part of that rebuilding. She replayed the last line again. "Maybe that's what Sandra is here for." Her chest tightened, and she whispered, "You never told me I was part of your healing?" A sudden knock on the window startled her. It was Mark, the archivist. His expression was serious. "You need to see this," he said, holding out a folder. "We were cataloging the rest of the safe." There was something under the false bottom. Inside the folder were several old photographs and a letter addressed to Sandra, for when she learns the truth. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was Keanu's, older, more controlled this time. "I never told you about the accident because I didn't want to burden you with my past. But every act of kindness you saw in me, every quiet moment you thought was strength, it came from that night, from losing her. I never stopped carrying her memory, but meeting you gave me something new, a reason to stop living in the past. You helped me forgive myself without ever knowing what you were forgiving me for." She pressed the letter to her chest, her hands trembling. "If you're reading this, then you found the tape. And now you know why Project Sunrise exists. It wasn't just for Ella. It was for Emily. And for you. You both saved me in different ways. One through love, one through faith. And if you can, finish what I couldn't. Make it real. Let people see that healing is possible even when the light goes out." The letter ended with one final line that made her heart ache and swell all at once. "You were my sunrise, too." She leaned back in her seat, the world around her dissolving into quiet. For years, She had wondered why Keanu looked at her the way he did sometimes, not with longing, but with recognition, as if seeing something he had lost long ago. Now she understood. She had reminded him of the woman he once loved, and in doing so helped him love life again. She whispered, "You carried all that pain and still smiled for everyone. How did you do it?" The car felt heavy with silence. But deep inside, she felt something new, peace. Not the kind that comes from answers, but the kind that comes from understanding. After a few minutes, she called Mark again. What else was in the safe? He hesitated. Just one more thing. A sealed envelope labeled Sunrise Premiere. Looks like instructions for something he wanted released posthumously. Bring it to me, she said. He returned a short while later and handed it to her. Inside was a single page that read, "When the time is right, play the last reel in front of the world. The light will finish what we started." Attached to it was a key card with the logo of a film festival that would take place in 2 weeks, the same one Keanu had once been invited to host. Sandra looked at the key card, her pulse quickening. He had planned everything, not for fame, not for recognition, but for closure. For both of them. She folded the papers carefully and whispered, "Then I'll do it. I'll show them who you really were." As she started the car and drove away, the sky began to darken again. But this time she didn't see it as a shadow. She saw it as the space before another sunrise. Later that night, she sat in her home surrounded by the letters, tapes, and reels. She could feel Keanu's presence everywhere, his laughter in the walls, his calm voice in the rain outside. And in that stillness, she made her decision. Project Sunrise would premiere exactly as he wished, not as a film about him, but as a film for him. But when she opened her laptop to begin planning, she found a new message in her inbox, one sent from an unknown address just 2 days before Keanu's death. The subject line read, "The final message, don't let them hide it." Her hands froze on the keyboard. She clicked the email open. Inside was a short video attachment labeled Sunrise Our Last MP4, and beneath it, a single line of text. "If this ever reaches you, tell the world the truth about me." Sandra's breath caught. The video began to load. The final message, the rain returned that night, falling against the windows of Sandra's home like 1,000 restless whispers. The city was asleep, but her heart was wide awake. Her laptop glowed softly in the dark room. On the screen, one file waited, Sunrise Last MP4. It was the final message Keanu had sent before he left the world in silence. Her hands hovered over the trackpad for a long time. She wasn't sure if she was ready. She had already uncovered so many truths, each one heavier than the last. But she also knew Keanu never left things unfinished. Whatever this was, it was meant to be found. She clicked play. For a few seconds, the screen was black. Then Keanu appeared, sitting in what looked like his home office. Behind him, shelves of books and a single candle flickered. He was wearing a simple black shirt, his hair slightly unkempt. His face looked tired, but his eyes carried the same calm warmth that had always defined him. "Hey, Sandy," he said softly, smiling faintly. "If this reaches you, I guess the world's already started asking questions." "It always does." He took a quiet breath. "I never liked the idea of final words. Life isn't a script. But I've learned that silence can sometimes turn into misunderstanding. So this is my way of making sure the silence means something good." Sandra's eyes burned with tears. She whispered, "You always thought ahead." Keanu continued, "You've probably found everything by now. The tapes, the letters, the reel. I know you. You'd chase truth even if it hurt. And I'm glad you did. Because there's something you deserve to know and something the world should know too." He leaned slightly forward. The candlelight flickered against his face. Project Sunrise wasn't just about the stories of kindness, he said. It was about the people who carried those stories. I started filming it because I wanted to show the world that pain doesn't make you weak. It makes you see clearer. But as I worked on it, I realized I was hiding behind it. I was trying to save everyone except myself. His voice softened, the faintest tremor creeping into his words. I kept it secret because there were people who didn't want it made. Studios, investors. They thought it was too raw, too personal. They wanted something glossy, something that fit the image. But I couldn't fake that. I couldn't make a film that ignored truth. So I walked away from it all. I bought back the rights. That's why you never saw me at big events for a while? He paused and looked down, his hand brushing through his hair. You once told me, he said, smiling softly. Kindness is brave because it never asks to be seen. I never forgot that. But what I didn't tell you was, you're the reason Project Sunrise ever existed. The first time you told me your mother's story, about how she taught you to look for the good in people even when they hurt you, that stayed with me. I wanted to make something that would carry that spirit long after we're gone. Sandra wiped her eyes, whispering, Oh, Keanu. He continued, his tone quieter now, almost fragile. But there's something else. Something I hid because I didn't want to change how you remembered me. The foundation behind Project Sunrise, the one meant to help children and families, it's already running. I've been funding it for years under another name. It's called the Ella Grace Fund. She wanted to help kids who lost their parents like she did. And I made sure she could, Sandra gasped softly. She had heard of that foundation. It had grown quietly, helping countless people around the world. She had never known he was behind it. Keanu's voice grew more emotional now. Every person who ever came to me with pain, I tried to give something back. Not because I wanted to be remembered, but because I didn't want their pain to feel invisible. I know how that feels. I lived it. He took a deep breath, eyes glistening. And you, Sandy, you were the one who taught me that even broken people can build something beautiful. You showed me grace when I didn't think I deserved it. You showed me that friendship can heal more than love ever could. So if this is goodbye, I want you to promise me something. Don't let the world turn this story into sadness. Make it hope. Make it light. His gaze steadied on the camera. Finish Sunrise. Not as my story, but as ours. Make it about every person who ever kept going when life said stop. He gave a faint, peaceful smile. And if anyone asks who I really was, tell them I was just a man who learned to see beauty in the cracks. For a few seconds, he stayed silent as if gathering strength for one last thought. Oh, he said softly. And one more thing. He leaned closer to the camera, his voice barely above a whisper. I left something for you. A letter in the place where we said our first goodbye. You'll find it under the bench. You'll understand when you see it. Then he smiled again. That familiar, gentle smile that always reached his eyes. Thank you for being my light. The video faded to black. Sandra sat frozen, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. It felt like he had just been there, as if his warmth still lingered in the room. She closed the laptop slowly, her hands shaking under the bench. Their first goodbye. She knew exactly where that was, the park near the old studio where they had sat one night after wrapping their first film together. It had been raining then, too. She had hugged him and said, See you soon, not knowing that soon would turn into years. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and car keys. The rain had grown heavier, but she didn't care. Every drop that hit her face felt like the world trying to keep her awake, alive, moving toward the truth. When she reached the park, it was nearly empty. Only the faint glow of streetlights lit the path. She walked toward the wooden bench, now worn and faded by time. She knelt down, her fingers brushing beneath the seat until she felt something taped there. A small envelope wrapped in clear plastic to protect it from the weather. Her breath caught. She tore it free and sat on the bench, opening it carefully. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sandy, if you've come this far, then you already know everything. Except one thing. The truth isn't what you reveal to the world. It's what you forgive within yourself. I spent years forgiving myself for what I couldn't save. Now I need you to forgive yourself for what you couldn't say. We were never unfinished. We were complete in silence. That was our peace. Don't let guilt steal it. At the bottom of the letter, a single line made her heart stop. And when you see the first light after the storm, know that I'm home. She looked up. The rain had stopped. The clouds began to part, and a pale golden light spread slowly across the horizon. Her tears mixed with the soft morning air. She whispered, You're home, Keanu. But then something else caught her eye. Tucked inside the envelope was a small memory card. It was labeled simply Sunrise, Raw. She inserted it into her phone. Dozens of clips appeared, footage she had never seen before. Interviews with strangers, children, mothers, workers, all speaking about small acts of kindness. In each clip, Keanu's voice asked the same question. What makes you keep believing in good? Every person answered differently, but their eyes all carried the same light. As she watched, Sandra realized what he had created. Not a film, but a living message. A mosaic of humanity. Project Sunrise wasn't meant to end in sadness. It was meant to remind people that hope is built from loss. And she knew in that moment that she couldn't keep it hidden any longer. She stood, clutching the letter and the memory card, and whispered into the wind. I'll finish it, Keanu, I promise. Then she walked back toward her car, ready for what came next, the world premiere he had planned, and the truth she would finally share with everyone. But as she started the engine, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "Don't release it." You don't know what you're risking. Her heart froze. She stared at the screen, her pulse racing. Who could know about the video? And what did they mean by risking? Her headlights flickered as she looked into the rearview mirror. For the first time that night, she wasn't sure if she was alone. The light returns. The message on her phone glowed in the darkness. Don't release it. You don't know what you're risking? Sandra sat frozen behind the wheel, rainwater dripping from her coat. Her pulse quickened. Outside, the street was empty, but the uneasy feeling that someone was watching her refused to fade. She looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness and fog. Still, her instincts whispered that this wasn't random. Someone didn't want Project Sunrise to see daylight. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. You didn't fight all your life for kindness just for me to be afraid now, she whispered. The next morning, she went straight to Keanu's lawyer. His name was Robert Hayes, a quiet, composed man who had handled Keanu's private affairs for years. When Sandra told him about the message and the footage, his expression changed instantly. You weren't supposed to know about that part, he said softly, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were old contracts, legal letters, and one particular document marked confidential. Sandra frowned. What is this? Robert hesitated. Keanu tried to release Project Sunrise years ago. He wanted it to be public, not owned by any studio. But the production company he'd signed with claimed rights over the footage. They said it didn't fit the brand, that it showed too much truth, too much pain. When he refused to let them alter it, they buried the project. They buried it? She repeated, disbelief thick in her voice. He nodded. He walked away from everything that year, bought back the material with his own money. He told me once, if I can't tell the truth, it's not worth telling at all. Her eyes glistened. And now someone's trying to stop it again. Robert looked uneasy. The same company merged with a larger one 2 years ago. They're powerful. If you release the footage publicly, they might claim ownership or even sue to suppress it. Sandra sat back, silent. The weight of it settled in. This was exactly what Keanu had fought. The system that profited from illusion and silenced what was real. After a long pause, she said quietly, Then I'll finish it differently. I'll show it where no one can buy or bury it. Robert frowned. What do you mean? She looked out the window. Live. That evening, Sandra called Mark, the archivist. Together, they set up a small projection space inside the same studio where Keanu had filmed his last messages, Soundstage 19. She didn't tell the press, only a few close friends, Keanu's family, and people who had worked with him through the years. But word spread, and by the time the night arrived, thousands were watching online, drawn by the mysterious headline, Sandra Bullock to reveal Keanu Reeves' final project. When she stepped onto the stage, the same wooden floor creaked under her feet. The smell of old paint and dust still lingered, but the lights above had been cleaned and restored. They shone softly now, like a sky full of patient stars. Sandra stood before the camera, holding Keanu's letter in her hands. The crowd fell silent. He never wanted fame, she began. He wanted truth. And truth, no matter how fragile, deserves light. She took a deep breath. The project you're about to see isn't a movie. It's a collection of moments, real ones. The ones he thought mattered more than all the rest. It's about loss, love, kindness, and the quiet courage to keep believing when life feels impossible. Her voice trembled. He called it Project Sunrise. She stepped back. The screen flickered to life. The footage began. Clips of strangers telling their stories. Children laughing, people crying, lives intersecting in small acts of grace. Then came Keanu, walking through crowded streets, sitting beside a homeless man, talking softly to a nurse, fixing a broken bike for a boy in the rain. His voice played over it all. The light we carry isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to be shared. As the reel played, many in the audience began to cry. Even those watching online sat frozen in silence. It wasn't spectacle, it was soul. Every frame felt alive, tender, deeply human. Halfway through the screening, Sandra noticed her phone buzzing. Messages flooded in from viewers around the world. Strangers saying how the video reminded them to call their parents, to forgive someone, to help a friend, to keep going. And as the final scene appeared, Keanu sitting under the sunrise, looking straight into the camera. His words filled the air one last time. We all fade. But if you pass on your light before you do, you never really disappear. The screen dimmed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the entire room stood and began to clap. Not out of applause, but reverence. People hugged, cried, smiled through tears. It felt less like a film premiere and more like a farewell prayer. Sandra stood quietly, tears streaming down her face. She felt something she hadn't in months. Peace. Then Mark approached her. "You should see this," he whispered. He handed her his phone. The live stream had surpassed 50 million viewers in under an hour. People across the world were lighting candles, tagging photos with a single message. Project Sunrise. She looked at the screen in disbelief. What Keanu had started in silence had become a movement in light. As she stepped outside, dawn had begun to break again. Soft, gold, endless. She walked toward the horizon, the cool air brushing against her face. In her pocket, the small letter he had left under the bench rested like a heartbeat. She pulled it out, looked at the final line again. "When you see the first light after the storm, know that I'm home." She smiled through tears and whispered, "You're home now, Keanu, and you took the whole world with you." She watched the sun rise fully, warm, brilliant, and alive. The light touched her face, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something close to joy. The story wasn't about death anymore. It was about continuation, about how one life, one heart, could echo through millions simply by being kind. And as the screen faded, Keanu's final words appeared one last time, the same ones that ended Project Sunrise. "Don't wait for light to find you. Become it."